8 years ago, the sun was a warm benediction on the university quad, spilling golden light over the sprawling green lawn. Caleb Zimmer, all earnest angles and nervous energy, was on one knee. His dark hair was a mess. His jeans were worn at the knees, but his eyes fixed on Nancy Swain held the unwavering conviction of a man who had found his entire universe. In his outstretched hand, a simple silver-plated ring with a tiny, hopeful chip of glass reflected the afternoon sky. "Nancy," he began, his voice cracking just enough to be endearing. "I know we're just kids. I know you don't have anything. But I have you. And that's everything." Nancy's heart felt like it might burst from her chest, a supernova of pure, unadulterated joy. A laugh bubbled up, tangled with a happy sob. Her friends, gathered in a giddy circle around them, let out a collective, breathless sigh. She dropped to her knees in front of him, ignoring the damp grass staining her sundress, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she whispered into his shoulder, the word a sacred promise. "Always." Yes, that first yes became a beloved ritual. A year later, he proposed again in the hushed quiet of the campus library, sliding a ring fashioned from a paper clip onto her finger as she tried to stifle her giggles. The year after that, he knelt in the pouring rain under a shared, flimsy umbrella, offering a plastic ring from a gumball machine. Each time, his eyes held the same devoted flame, and each time, her yes was just as heartfelt, their private joke a testament to a love that felt as infinite as the sky. On the night of their graduation, they lay on a blanket under a canopy of stars, their futures stretching before them like an open road. "One day, Non," Caleb murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm, "I'm going to give you the real thing. A grand wedding. The most expensive dress you've ever seen. We'll have our pictures taken in the best studio in the city. And everyone will see how beautiful my wife is." Nancy turned, her face illuminated by the soft moonlight. She saw no hint of doubt in him, only an unwavering determination. He was her anchor, her compass, her entire world. "I don't need any of that, Caleb. I just need you." She kissed him, a deep, lingering promise of a life she couldn't wait to begin. His love was the only luxury she would ever need. 3 years later, the world was no longer golden. It was the color of institutional gray, lit by the merciless, flickering hum of fluorescent tubes in a sterile police station interrogation room. The air was thick with the scent of bitter coffee and antiseptic cleaner. Nancy sat on a cold plastic chair, her body numb, her mind a screaming void. The man across the table, Captain Miller, a friend of her father's, had eyes filled with a pity that felt like acid on her raw nerves. "The preliminary report is conclusive," Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly thing. "It was a professional hit, the Salazar cartel. They left a message, Nancy. They made an example of your father." The words didn't fully land. Her father, decorated narcotics officer, the strongest man she had ever known, murdered. The two concepts refused to connect in her brain. All she could see was his smiling face, the last time she'd seen him, waving from his doorstep. Miller slid a thin file across the metal table. "Your father was closer than anyone to bringing them down. He had an informant, away deep inside their network. That informant is now our only link, and they only trust a Swain." He leaned forward, the weight of his next words pressing the air from the room. "We need someone to finish his work, to go undercover. It's the only way to get justice for him, to dismantle the entire operation." Nancy stared at the file, her name typed neatly on the label. An operation. A mission. An opportunity for vengeance that felt like a double-edged sword. "What would it entail?" she asked, her voice a hollow echo of itself. "A complete departure from your life," Miller stated, his gaze unflinching. "We would fake your death, an accident. No one can know you're alive, especially not the people you love. They're a liability. The cartel is ruthless. If they suspect you have a weakness, they'll exploit it. They'll go after anyone you care about to get to you, Caleb. His name slammed into her mind with the force of a physical blow. His hopeful smile, his promises of a grand wedding, his unwavering love. He was her only weakness. To protect him, she had to become a ghost. She had to sever the one tether that kept her grounded. The choice was never a choice at all. His life was worth more than her happiness. Her tiny apartment felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of a future that would never be. Boxes were stacked against the walls, a testament to a life she was methodically erasing. When Caleb arrived, his face was a mask of confusion and worrying. He took in the boxes, then her, his eyes searching for an answer. "None. What's going on? Are we moving?" he asked, a hopeful tremor in his voice. Nancy steeled herself, dredging up a coldness she didn't know she possessed. She met his gaze, forcing her expression to remain blank, contemptuous. "I'm moving, Caleb. You're not." The hope in his eyes flickered and died. What are you talking about?" "I can't do this anymore," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Look at this place. Look at us. I'm tired of waiting for one day. I want a real life. I want nice things. A man who can provide for me. Not just promises." He stared at her as if she were a stranger. The pain that bloomed across his face was so profound, so absolute. It nearly shattered her resolve. "This is a joke, right, Nancy? We love each other." "Love doesn't pay the bills," she snapped, each cruel word a fresh wound she inflicted upon them both. "I've been with you since we were kids. I've wasted enough time. I'm tired of being with a broke loser who has nothing to offer." The word loser hung in the air between them, ugly and violent. Caleb flinched, his face paling. He took a step toward her, his hands outstretched, pleading. "Don't say that. Please, I'll work harder. I'll get that promotion. I'll become rich. I swear. I'll give you anything you want. Just don't leave me. Please, Nancy." His desperation was a knife twisting in her gut. This was the moment, the final, killing blow. She had to break him completely so he would let her go, so he would be safe. She turned her back on him, her entire body trembling with the effort of holding back a tidal wave of sobs. "It's too late, Caleb. I've already made my choice." She heard his sharp, ragged breath behind her, the sound of a heart breaking. After a moment of crushing silence, the apartment door clicked shut. Only then did she allow herself to collapse, pressing her face into her hands as silent, agonizing tears streamed down her face, mourning the man she loved and the woman she had just been forced to kill. The vast expanse of Caleb Zimmer's mansion was less a home and more a gilded cage, each polished marble surface reflecting a distorted version of Nancy Swain. 3 years she had worn this invisible inmate's uniform, a plain grey dress, hair pulled back, face scrubbed of any makeup that might recall the woman he once loved. 3 years of a marriage forged in the fires of his hatred. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a silhouette of power and ice. Beside him, a woman with Nancy's dark hair and a similar curve to her smile laughed at something he'd said. She was the third one this month. A parade of ghosts, each a cruel echo of the love he believed she had murdered. Nancy continued polishing a silver tray in the corner, her movements small and deliberate, making herself as insignificant as the dust motes dancing in the sterile air. Finally, Caleb dismissed the woman with a curt nod. The click of the front door closing echoed in the cavernous hall. Silence descended, thick and heavy. "Come here," he commanded without turning. Nancy set the tray down and approached, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. She stopped a respectful distance away, her gaze fixed on the middle of his back. "You still haven't asked me why I married you," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. He finally turned, and the eyes that met hers were chips of Arctic ice, devoid of the warmth she so desperately remembered. People say it's because I'm a masochist, that I enjoy having the author of my misery under my own roof. Nancy remained silent. There was nothing to say. Her silence was a shield, the only one she had left. I prefer to think of it as a debt, he continued, taking a predatory step closer. A life for a life. You destroyed mine, so yours belongs to me. And a debtor must pay. I'll grant you a small mercy. You will fulfill 3 wishes for me, 3 demands. Once they are met, I'll sign the divorce papers, and you can disappear from my life for good. A flicker of hope, treacherous and painful, sparked in Nancy's chest. Disappear. It was what she had to do anyway. Her undercover mission was nearing its final, dangerous phase. This was a way out, a chance to fade away without him ever knowing the real reason. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a chilling, humorless twist of his lips. I'll let you know when the time is right. The first wish came a week later. Not from Caleb's lips, but from Shirley's. Shirley, her once best friend, now a constant, cawing presence in the mansion, draped on Caleb's arm like a fragile, expensive vine. She watched Nancy with eyes that held a venomous pity. That evening, as Nancy served them dinner, Shirley sighed dramatically, leaning her head on Caleb's shoulder. I'm just so tired, darling. It's been a long day. She turned her gaze to Nancy, a sickly sweet smile playing on her lips. Caleb, for your first wish, could Nancy bring us a bottle of champagne to the bedroom and a bucket of ice? We might be a while. The humiliation was a physical blow, sucking the air from Nancy's lungs. It wasn't just a demand for service. It was a command to be a spectator to her own replacement, to facilitate the intimacy she was denied. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't contradict Shirley. He simply gave Nancy a cold, expectant look. His wish. Nancy's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, but her face remained a mask of calm resignation. This was part of the price. She nodded once, her eyes downcast. Of course. She retrieved the chill bottle, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. The crystal glasses felt impossibly heavy. Walking down the hallway to their master suite, the room she had never been allowed to share, was the longest walk of her life. She placed the tray on the nightstand, avoiding the sight of Shirley preening on the edge of the bed, her silk robe falling open. Nancy didn't look at Caleb. She couldn't. She simply turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her, the sound of Shirley's triumphant giggle chasing her into the shadows of the hall. The setup for the second wish was even more insidious. A few days later, Shirley collapsed in the living room, a performance of practiced frailty. Caleb rushed to her side, his cold facade cracking with genuine alarm. Later, in the sterile white of a private hospital room, Shirley lay propped against pillows, and food dripping into her arm. It's nothing, Caleb, really, she whispered, her hand clutching his. It's just my body has never been the same. Not since she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Not since I gave you my kidney. Nancy, standing by the door as ordered, felt the floor tilt beneath her. The lie was so audacious, so monstrous. It was almost brilliant. Caleb's expression softened into one of profound guilt and gratitude. He had been in a car accident 5 years ago, a brutal wreck orchestrated by the very cartel Nancy was investigating. His life had been saved by a transplant, the donor anonymous. Or so he'd thought. He squeezed Shirley's hand. You saved my life, Shirley. I owe you everything. Shirley's gaze flickered to Nancy, sharp and calculating, before she looked back at Caleb. My blood count is low. The doctors say I might need a transfusion to recover my strength. That was all it took. Caleb stood up and turned to Nancy, his face a mask of stone. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were ordering a transaction. My second wish. Shirley needs blood. You're a universal donor. You will donate. Nancy's own blood ran cold. Shirley knew. She must have found the hospital records somehow. Nancy had been the anonymous donor. She had given Caleb one of her kidneys without a moment's hesitation. A secret act of love before she was forced to fake her death and go undercover. Now, living with only one kidney, a significant blood donation would leave her dangerously weak. But to refuse was to reveal everything. To unravel the years of lies she had constructed to protect him. To expose herself and her mission. She looked from Shirley's smug, triumphant face to Caleb's, which was unreadable, impassive. He saw a simple equation. One woman had given him a kidney, the other owed him her life. It was a fair trade in his broken world. For Nancy, it was a different kind of calculation. Another piece of herself she could give him. Another silent sacrifice on an altar he didn't even know existed. Fine, she said, the single word costing her more than he would ever know. Her body was already a battlefield, and she had just agreed to surrender more of its territory. All for a man who looked at her as if she were nothing. The ballroom glittered under the weight of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of lilac and expensive perfume. On a small, elevated stage, Caleb Zimmer stood with his arm wrapped possessively around Shirley's waist. A portrait of corporate royalty. His face, once the landscape of Nancy's world, was now a mask of cold indifference chiseled from granite. Shirley and I are pleased to announce our wedding will take place this Saturday. Caleb's voice, a blade of ice, cut through the polite murmur of the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing Shirley's triumphant, venomously sweet smile. Her eyes found Nancy in the crowd, a flicker of victory in their depths. And we have a special request, Shirley added, her voice syrupy. My dearest friend, Nancy, has graciously agreed to be my bridesmaid. It was her final wish before she moves on to her new life. The lie was a physical blow. A collective gasp, followed by whispers, rippled through the guests. Nancy stood frozen, the hideous peach-colored dress they'd forced on her feeling like a shroud. She offered a brittle smile, a silent performance of acquiescence. My final wish. The words echoed in her mind, a prophecy she was about to fulfill. 2 days later, Nancy walked into a stark, minimalist photography studio. The air smelled of chemicals and dust. I'd like a portrait, she told the young, baffled photographer. A memorial photo, he blinked, for someone who passed. Yes, Nancy said, her voice hollow. She sat on the stool, the unforgiving studio lights draining all the color from her face. My ex-husband is getting married in 3 days. That day will be my funeral. The photographer shifted uncomfortably but raised his camera. Nancy stared directly into the lens, her expression not one of grief, but of profound, bone-deep resignation. She deliberately placed her left hand on her knee, the simple, worn wedding band she still wore catching the light. It wasn't a diamond from Caleb's vast fortune. It was a plain gold ring from a time when their love was their only wealth. The photographer, sensing the gravity of the moment, zoomed in, the click of the shutter sounding like a final judgment. She thought of the promises Caleb had once whispered to her under a blanket of stars, a custom-made gown, a photo shoot in Paris, a life of shared dreams. Now, Shirley would wear that gown. Shirley would get those photos. The thought no longer brought tears, only a vast, empty ache. Her phone buzzed, a sterile, anonymous text. Arrangements are confirmed. 3 days. All traces will be gone. She typed a single-word reply, proceed. The wedding day dawned with mocking brilliance. The soaring arches of the cathedral were draped in ivory roses, and an orchestra played a melody that felt like a dirge in Nancy's ears. Caleb stood at the altar, devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his eyes fixed on the cathedral doors, A flicker of something impatience, regret, in their depths, that it wasn't his bride who arrived first. Two men in somber black suits walked silently up the marble aisle, their polished shoes echoing in the sudden, heavy silence. They stopped before the altar, their faces grimly professional. One held a small, unassuming porcelain box. "Mr. Zimmer," the taller man said, his voice low and respectful, "we are from the city crematorium. We were instructed to deliver this to you personally. Our deepest condolences on the passing of Ms. Nancy Swain." He placed the small urn on the altar steps. A wave of confusion and outrage swept through the guests. Shirley, waiting in the vestibule, paled. Caleb stared at the urn, his face contorting into a mask of pure fury. "Get this thing out of here," he snarled. "Is this another one of her games? Another pathetic attempt to get money? Tell Nancy her theatrics won't work this time. The show is over." The men, looking disturbed, exchanged a glance and quietly retreated. But before the chaos could fully erupt, a frail but resolute voice cut through the tension. It was Mrs. Cable, Caleb's housekeeper for over a decade, her face streaked with tears. She marched directly to Shirley, who had just entered the cathedral, and her voice trembled with righteous anger. "You did this," she accused, pointing a trembling finger. "You monster, you ordered her to throw everything away. You told me to intercept any letter, to block any call. You wanted to erase her." Shirley scoffed. She was a gold digger. Those things were just junk. Mrs. Gable's voice cracked, rising in volume. Caleb, who had been about to dismiss her, froze. He turned, his attention caught by the raw pain in her voice. "Do you call the cracked mug he won for her at the carnival junk? She drank from it every morning, or the cheap umbrella that broke while he shielded her from a storm? She kept it in her closet, said it was a monument to his love, and the photos you told her to burn them." The housekeeper's words now poured out in a torrent of grief and fury. "She wouldn't do it. She kept one. That dreadful, blurry photo you both took on your first date. The one you always teased her about. She told me, this is the real Caleb. Before all the money. This is the man I'll love until the day I die." She refused to part with it. She loved him, not his wealth. Each word was a hammer blow against the wall Caleb had built around his heart. The cracked cup, the broken umbrella, the ugly photo. Trivial, worthless things he had long forgotten, but to Nancy, they were treasures. The opulent cathedral, the diamond on Shirley's finger, the entire lavish spectacle of this wedding suddenly felt cheap and hollow. The image of the small porcelain urn on the altar steps burned in his mind. He looked from the urn to Shirley's panicked face, then to the tearful, honest eyes of his housekeeper. For the first time in years, the cruel narrative he had so carefully constructed began to crumble, revealing a terrifying, gaping void beneath. A single, agonizing thought pierced through his rage and denial, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. What have I done? A single, jagged crack had formed in the foundation of Caleb's reality, and he couldn't stop probing it with the sharp edge of his doubt. Seated behind the monolithic desk in his penthouse office, the city a grid of indifferent lights below, he felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with business. He bypassed his assistant, his fingers flying across his private terminal, dispatching a terse, encrypted message to his most trusted investigator. The order was absolute. Find everything on Nancy Swain. Medical history, financials, her movements before the wedding. Unearth it all, now. The first report came back within hours. A footnote about a curious obstacle. Records at St. Jude's Hospital are firewalled. His investigator wrote, multiple technical glitches when I query the donor database from 3 years ago. Someone's actively scrubbing Shirley. The name landed in Caleb's mind like a shard of ice. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in the cavernous silence. He had built an empire on calculated risks and gut feelings, and his gut was screaming that the woman who claimed to have saved his life had, in fact, stolen it. He authorized a direct, brute-force data retrieval, the kind that cost a small fortune and bent a dozen laws. He didn't care. The truth arrived not as a whisper, as a digital sledgehammer. An official hospital document, stripped of its firewalls, materialized on his screen. It was a kidney transplant record. His transplant record. His eyes scanned past his own name, past the dates to the line item that had defined the last 3 years of his life. Donor information. Anonymous. Post-surgical cross-reference match. SWAIN. Nancy. Caleb stopped breathing. The name was stark, clinical, and utterly devastating. A sub-report was attached. A physician's note flagged with an urgent red header. It detailed the severe health complications for the donor due to a pre-existing condition, strongly advising against the procedure. The donation had been a profound, life-altering risk, a sacrifice. Nancy had crippled her own health to save him, and then vanished, allowing another woman to take the credit. Just as the air returned to his lungs in a ragged gasp, a second file arrived. Restored CCTV footage from the small photography studio across from the wedding venue. The timestamp was from minutes before Nancy had collapsed. He clicked play. The image was grainy, the audio laced with static, but it was her. Nancy stood alone, her back to the camera, staring at a portrait of him and Shirley. Her shoulders trembled. She raised a hand to the glass, her fingers tracing the outline of his face. "I love you, Caleb," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing that tore through the years and right into his soul. "I'm so sorry. I have to do this. It's the only way to make them stop, the only way to keep you safe." She turned, her face a mask of tear-streaked agony. "I have to die today so you can live." The video ended. The screen went black, reflecting his own hollowed-out expression. The intricate web of lies Shirley had woven wasn't just a deception. It was a cage, and he had willingly locked himself inside. When he summoned Shirley to his office, the cold fury radiating from him was a physical force. She walked in smiling, a new diamond bracelet on her wrist, her expression faltering only when she saw the 2 documents printed on his desk. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. Caleb didn't look at her. He simply tapped the hospital record. "Explain this." Her face went pale. It's a mistake, a clerical error." He slid the transcript of the video footage across the desk, her eyes widened in panic. "Where did you get that? You didn't save my life." "Shirley," Caleb said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You buried the woman who did. That was all it took." The carefully constructed facade crumbled into a pathetic heap of frantic confessions and desperate sobs. She admitted to everything, intercepting Nancy's letters, doctoring records, leveraging his grief to slide into Nancy's place. She had watched Nancy sacrifice everything, and had seen it not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. Caleb listened without a word, the sound of her weeping nothing more than static. When she was finished, he pressed the intercom. "Security, escort Ms. Vance from the building. She is not to return." Alone again, the silence was heavier than ever, filled with the ghosts of his own cruelty. The rage receded, leaving behind a vast, empty ache. He felt the pull, a desperate need to connect with the woman he had so horrifically wronged. He left the office, driving on autopilot until he found himself at the small, dusty archive room of the local newspaper where Nancy had once interned. He bribed the clerk and was left alone with boxes of her old assignments and personal effects. Tucked inside a worn copy of Wuthering Heights was a small, leather-bound diary. His hands trembled as he opened it. Her familiar script, younger and more hopeful, filled the pages. He turned to an entry dated a week before he had ever spoken to her. I saw him again today in the coffee shop. The one they call the Wolf of Zimmercourt. He always looks so serious, like he's carrying the world on his shoulders. He probably doesn't even know I exist. But sometimes, when he looks out the window, his guard drops, and I see something lonely. I wish I had the courage to just say hello. The diary fell from his hands. It had never been one-sided. She had seen him, the real him. Even then, the weight of his failure pressed down, suffocating him. He closed his eyes, his head in his hands, and in the darkness, a memory bloomed into life. She was there, the younger Nancy, a girl of 21 with a shy smile and eyes full of unwritten stories, sitting across from him in that long-forgotten coffee shop. She looked not with judgment, but with a gentle, heartbreaking understanding. I wasn't worthy of you, he whispered to the vision, the words tasting like ash. I hurt you, I broke you. The memory of her smiled sadly. You were worthy of her love, she said, her voice a soft echo in his mind. But the 28-year-old Nancy she had a promise to keep, a danger you couldn't know about. She had to protect you, even from herself. Leaving you was the only way. The vision faded, leaving him with the scent of old paper and the crushing, clarifying truth. His revenge, his anger, his marriage, it had all been a monstrous mistake. A farce built on the tomb of her sacrifice. But she wasn't dead. The video proved it. She had faked her death to set him free from a foe he couldn't see. A new strength, forged in the fires of regret, solidified in his chest. He would not mourn the ghost she had created. He would find the woman who had bled for him, the woman who had loved him enough to disappear. He would unravel the danger she was running from, and this time, he would be the one to protect her. He would earn back the love he had so carelessly thrown away. He would find Nancy, whatever it took. The salt-laced wind whipped off the grey Atlantic, a relentless whisper against the weathered siding of the coastal cottage. It was a place designed for anonymity, a dot on a map where people went to disappear. Caleb Zimmer had driven for 10 hours straight, a roar of his Aston Martin's engine a poor substitute for the thunder in his own chest. The information from his security chief, a single, untraceable satellite ping, had been a shot of adrenaline to a heart he thought had turned to stone. He saw her before she saw him. She was standing on the narrow deck overlooking the turbulent water, her back to the house. Her hair, longer now, and the color of warm honey, was a wild flag in the wind, unbound and free. She wore a simple, cream-colored cable knit sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the severe, haunted woman in tailored suits he had forced into his life. This was the ghost of the girl he once knew, the one who laughed with her whole body and looked at him like he was the only man in the world. This was Nancy. His feet were leaden as he crossed the gravel path, the crunching sound swallowed by the surf. He stepped onto the deck, the old wood groaning under his weight. She froze. The casual line of her shoulders went rigid. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, widened. Shock was the first wave, crashing into her with visible force. It was followed by a tidal wave of emotions so complex it stole his breath. The deep, aching sorrow of a long-buried grief, the flicker of a cornered animal's fear, and beneath it all, a current so powerful and undeniable it nearly brought him to his knees. Love. Raw, resilient, and still there, in her gaze, Caleb saw the reflection of his own soul. The cold fury he'd nurtured for years evaporated, leaving only the hollow, echoing guilt of his cruelty. He saw the pain he'd inflicted on her, the public humiliation, the private torment of their sham marriage. He had punished a phantom, a woman who didn't exist, while the real Nancy was fighting a war he couldn't imagine. A silent apology, desperate and profound, passed from him to her. In the slight softening of her jaw, the barest tremble of her lips, he received a forgiveness he hadn't earned. Nancy, you breathed, the name a prayer and a confession on his tongue. She didn't answer. Just watched him. Her arms wrapped around herself as if to hold the pieces of her story together. The wind tore at them, pulling at their clothes, an invisible force trying to keep them apart. But the gravity between them was stronger. He closed the remaining distance, his movements careful, as if approaching a skittish deer. They told me you were alive, that it was all a lie. His voice was rough, scarred by disbelief and a dawning, terrifying hope. But not the way I thought. Her throat worked. Come inside, Caleb. It's cold. The cottage was sparse, functional. A stone fireplace, a simple sofa, a small kitchen. It was a safe house, not a home. She moved with an economy of motion he now recognized as professional discipline. Kneeling to light the kindling in the hearth, the flames caught, casting flickering shadows that danced across her face, highlighting the new, fine lines around her eyes, lines he had helped put there. As the fire crackled to life, chasing the chill from the room, she finally spoke. Her voice was low, steady, the voice of someone who had recited the facts to herself 1,000 times. It started with my parents, she began, her eyes fixed on the flames. Their death wasn't an accident, they were murdered. My father was an accountant for a man named Julian Croft. He stumbled onto something, a money laundering scheme for an international trafficking ring. He went to the authorities, and Croft had them silenced. Caleb sank onto the sofa, the fine wool of his overcoat feeling absurdly out of place. He listened, his entire world reconfiguring with every word she spoke. The case went cold, she continued. The official report was faulty breaks. I knew it was a lie, so I joined the force. I spent years working my way up, making connections, until I got a spot on the federal task force investigating Croft's network. The only way in was deep undercover. She finally looked at him, her gaze unflinching. They knew about you, Caleb, from the beginning. You were my only vulnerability, the only leverage they could ever have. The closer I got, the more I could feel them watching you. A near miss on the freeway, a break-in at your office that was dismissed as random. They were tests, warnings. The blood ran cold in his veins. The incidents she mentioned were real, brushed aside at the time as the minor annoyances of a wealthy man's life. My handler and I made a decision, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. To protect you, Nancy Swain had to die. It was the only way to sever the connection, to make them believe they had no hold on me. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The full, devastating weight of her sacrifice crushed him. She hadn't left him. She had saved him. She had walked into hell to keep him safe, while he, in his arrogant grief, had built a monument of bitterness and revenge. When she had reappeared, broken and desperate, he had seen only a traitor, not the soldier coming home from war. The story spilled out of her, the years of living under false identities, the constant threat of exposure, the final operation that had, just last week, brought down Croft's entire empire. Shirley, her supposed best friend, had been an informant for Croft, paid to monitor Nancy and, eventually, Caleb. She had orchestrated Nancy's return to his life, a cruel play to destabilize him and see if Nancy's loyalties had truly shifted. When she finished, the only sound was the fire and the howling wind. The truth hung between them, brutal and beautiful. Caleb was on his feet before he realized he was moving. He closed the space between them into strides and pulled her into his arms. His hold fierce, desperate. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her salt, wood smoke, and the essential, familiar fragrance that was truly her. He felt the shudder that ran through her body as she finally let go, her hands clutching the back of his coat. I'm so sorry, he choked out, the words ripped from his soul. Nancy, God, I'm so sorry for everything. He felt the dampness of her tears against his skin. And then his own broke free, hot and shameless. They were tears of grief for the years they had lost, of rage at the world that had been so cruel to her, and of a relief so profound it felt like grace. He held her tighter, anchoring himself to her, the only thing that had ever been real. "I will never," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion as he pulled back just enough to look at her, framing her tear-streaked face with his hands. "Let you go again. Do you hear me? Never." She gave a watery, broken laugh, nodding as fresh tears welled. "I'm not running anymore, Caleb." He wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely tender. "That contract, that marriage, it was a prison I built out of my own pain. Let me tear it down. Let me build a real life with you. A home, one with no secrets, no shadows." A fragile, hopeful light returned to her eyes, a glimmer of the woman she was meant to be. "A life where I don't have to look over my shoulder," she whispered, the very idea seeming like an impossible dream. "Where we can just be anything you want," he promised, his forehead resting against hers. The storm outside raged on, but inside their small, secluded world, a profound peace began to settle. The past was a landscape of ghosts and ashes, but here, in this moment, a future was taking root. "No more running," he repeated, sealing the promise with a kiss that was not about passion, but about homecoming. "Only forward," she whispered against his lips. Together,